when feathers met firepower and introduction. The Second World War was a crucible of innovation, a desperate global scramble for any advantage, no matter how unconventional. Amidst this clamor of metallic invention and earth-shattering explosions, a quieter, more peculiar idea was taking flight. It was an idea that involved not complex circuitry or advanced aerodynamics, but the humble pigeon. Yes, the common city bird, often dismissed as a feathered nuisance, was at the center of a serious, government-funded project. The goal? To guide missiles to their targets with unparalleled accuracy. Imagine the scene. Top military brass, accustomed to discussing tank divisions and bombing raids, are presented with a proposal involving avian kamikaze pilots, albeit ones that would, hopefully, survive their mission. The war demanded creative solutions, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible or even sensible. In this atmosphere of urgent necessity, even the most outlandish concepts could find an ear, especially if they promised a breakthrough. The challenge of hitting moving targets like ships at sea or specific enemy installations was immense. Early missile technology was notoriously unreliable, often veering wildly off course. The project, codenamed Project Pigeon, later Project Orcon for organic control, sought to harness the remarkable visual acuity and trainability of pigeons. The story of Project Pigeon is a fascinating intersection of behavioral psychology, military ambition, and the sheer unpredictability of innovation. It's a story that deserves to be told, not just for its inherent quirkiness, but for what it reveals about the human and avian capacity for adaptation and the often surprising paths that lead to technological advancement, or sometimes, to a fascinating dead end. The mind behind the bird, enter B.F. Skinner. The architect of this audacious plan was none other than Burrhus Frederick Skinner, a name synonymous with behavioral psychology. Skinner was not a military strategist or an engineer. He was a Harvard psychologist renowned for his work on operant conditioning. He had famously demonstrated that animal behavior could be shaped and controlled through reinforcement, rewards, and punishments. His Skinner box became a staple in psychology labs, a controlled environment where animals like rats and pigeons learned to perform specific actions, like pressing a lever or pecking a disc, to receive a food pellet. Skinner's leap from laboratory pigeons learning simple tasks to pigeons guiding sophisticated weaponry might seem vast, but for him, it was a logical extension of his research. He observed the remarkable visual capabilities of pigeons, their ability to distinguish colors and patterns with great accuracy. During the early years of World War II, as he watched newsreels of inaccurate bombing raids and the terrible human cost, an idea began to form. What if the precise, learned responses he was cultivating in his lab could be put to use in a way that saved lives by making weapons more accurate, thereby shortening the war? Skinner envisioned a missile with a nose cone housing a pigeon, or a team of pigeons, trained to peck at an image of the target projected onto a screen. Their pecks would control the missile's fins, steering it towards its objective. He believed that a living organism, with its inherent ability to adapt and respond to a dynamic visual field, could outperform the rudimentary electronic guidance systems of the era. Skinner was driven by a genuine desire to contribute to the war effort, but also by a profound belief in the power of his scientific principles. He approached the National Defense Research Committee with his proposal, a proposal that must have raised more than a few eyebrows. Training pigeons for pinpoint precision, a pecking order for victory. The training process for these feathered navigators was a marvel of Skinner's behavioral engineering. It began with teaching the pigeons to peck at a specific target image, typically a silhouette of an enemy ship or a particular landmark. This was done in a modified Skinner box, where a correct peck at the target displayed on a small screen would result in the immediate delivery of a grain of food. This positive reinforcement was crucial. The pigeons quickly learned to associate pecking the target with a tasty reward, their motivation sharpened by being kept at about 80% of their normal body weight, ensuring they were always eager for their next well-earned meal. Once the basic pecking response was established, the complexity of the task was gradually increased. The target image would move across the screen, and the pigeons had to learn to track it continuously. The screen was divided into quadrants, and if the target drifted, say, to the upper left quadrant, the pigeon had to peck in that quadrant to bring it back to the center. The pecks were not just for show. They were connected to a system that would, in the actual missile, control the guidance fins. To ensure reliability, Skinner often used 3 pigeons in the missile's nose cone, each facing its own screen. The guidance system was designed to respond if 2 out of the 3 pigeons agreed on the target's location by pecking in the same corresponding section of their screens. The pigeons were essentially acting as a biological computer, processing visual information and translating it into corrective actions. The training was meticulous and time-consuming, requiring patience and a deep understanding of animal behavior. The initial tests of Project Pigeon were conducted in controlled laboratory settings, far from any actual battlefield, but the results were remarkably promising. Skinner and his team developed sophisticated simulators to mimic the conditions of a missile in flight. Pigeons, securely harnessed, would look at screens displaying moving images of targets, such as ships or specific ground locations. Their pecking responses were meticulously recorded and analyzed. The data began to paint a clear picture. The pigeons were not just pecking randomly, they were accurately tracking the targets, making consistent and appropriate corrective steering pecks. One of the key advantages the pigeons demonstrated was their ability to recognize and lock onto complex patterns, something early electronic systems struggled with. A pigeon could distinguish the shape of a particular type of ship against a cluttered background of waves and other vessels. They could maintain this lock, even if the target was partially obscured by smoke or clouds, a significant challenge for the primitive optical sensors of the day. The speed and accuracy of their pecking were impressive, with some birds making several corrective pecks per second. This rapid response time was crucial for guiding a fast-moving projectile towards an equally agile target, showcasing an organic processing power that was hard to replicate mechanically. The project even progressed to more dynamic simulations. The pigeons consistently pecked to keep the target image centered, effectively flying the simulator towards its objective. These demonstrations were crucial in convincing skeptical observers that the idea, however strange, had genuine merit. The data showed hit rates that were, in some simulations, superior to what could be expected from human bombardiers or existing mechanical guidance systems, especially against moving or camouflaged targets. Despite the promising results from simulations and the undeniable ingenuity of Skinner's approach, Project Pigeon faced a significant uphill battle for acceptance and continued funding. The primary obstacle was deep-seated skepticism from many within the military establishment and the scientific community. The idea of relying on birds to guide sophisticated weaponry struck many as inherently unreliable, even comical, regardless of the data. In a world rapidly embracing the perceived precision and predictability of electronics and mechanics, a biological guidance system seemed like a step backward, a quaint anachronism in an age of burgeoning technological marvels. The giggle factor, as it might be called today, was a persistent problem. Officials would listen to Skinner's presentations, look at the data, and then perhaps picture a pigeon cooing its way towards an enemy destroyer. This perception issue was compounded by the fact that Skinner was a psychologist, not an engineer or a physicist, the more traditional architects of wartime technology. His expertise in animal behavior, while central to the project's success, was perhaps less readily understood or valued by those making decisions about weapons development. Furthermore, the Second World War was a period of incredibly rapid technological advancement in other areas of guidance and control. Electronic guidance systems, though initially rudimentary, were evolving quickly. Radar in particular was revolutionizing targeting and navigation. These emerging technologies, while perhaps not yet as adept as pigeons at recognizing complex visual patterns in all conditions, promised a future of purely mechanical and electrical control, which seemed more robust, more scalable, and frankly, more modern to the decision-makers of the time. The allure of a solution that didn't require feeding, training, or housing living creatures was strong, representing a more conventional path of technological progress. The logistical challenges of deploying a pigeon-guided missile system were also considerable. Ultimately, despite its early promise and the dedicated efforts of B.F. Skinner and his team, Project Pigeon was officially shelved in 1944 by the National Defense Research Committee. The decision was not a reflection of outright failure in the pigeons' performance during testing. Indeed, they had often exceeded expectations in simulations. Rather, it was a confluence of factors, primarily the prevailing skepticism and the rapid advancements being made in electronic guidance systems. The military leadership, while intrigued, ultimately opted for what they perceived as more reliable and conventional technological pathways. The idea of pigeon-guided missiles, however innovative, was deemed too unconventional, and perhaps too uncertain for widespread adoption in the heat of war. One of the key reasons for the project's cancellation was the allocation of resources. Wartime demands were immense, and funding had to be prioritized. As electronic targeting and guidance systems began to show significant progress, they attracted the lion's share of investment and attention. These systems, while initially less sophisticated in pattern recognition than the Pigeons, held the promise of mass production, easier maintenance, in theory, and a perceived higher degree of reliability under diverse combat conditions, without the complexities of managing live animals. The military preferred solutions that fit more comfortably within their existing technological and logistical frameworks, and Pigeons, quite simply, did not. Skinner himself was, understandably, disappointed by the decision. He remained convinced of the project's viability and the Pigeons' capabilities. He believed that the military had prematurely abandoned a potentially revolutionary guidance system. However, the tide of technological preference had turned decisively towards electronic solutions, and the window of opportunity for avian guidance, at least in that era, had closed before it could be fully field-tested in actual combat scenarios. Though Project Pigeon never dropped a single bomb or guided a missile in anger, its legacy is surprisingly enduring, albeit in unexpected ways. Firstly, it stands as a remarkable testament to B.F. Skinner's genius and his unwavering belief in the principles of operant conditioning. The project was a bold, real-world application of his laboratory findings, demonstrating that animal behavior could be shaped to perform incredibly complex tasks. It pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible in animal training, and highlighted the sophisticated cognitive abilities of creatures, often dismissed as simple. The meticulous training regimens developed for the Pigeons laid groundwork for advanced animal training techniques still influential today. Secondly, Project Pigeon serves as a fascinating case study in the history of military innovation and the complex interplay between scientific possibility, technological development, and institutional acceptance. It highlights how even promising ideas can be sidelined if they are too unconventional, or if they compete with rapidly advancing more mainstream technologies. The giggle factor undoubtedly played a role, reminding us that human perception and bias can influence technological adoption as much as objective performance data. The story is often recounted with a mixture of amusement and admiration for its sheer audacity, a quirky footnote in the annals of World War II research that captures the era's desperate search for an edge. The project also subtly influenced subsequent research in areas like biorobotics and human-animal interaction. While not a direct lineage, the idea of harnessing biological organisms for complex tasks resonated in later explorations of animal senses for detection or navigation. More broadly, Skinner's work, including Project Pigeon, contributed to a greater understanding of learning and cognition, which had implications far beyond military applications, impacting fields like education, therapy, and artificial intelligence. The very idea of programming behavior, whether in an animal or a machine, owes something to the foundational work demonstrated so vividly by the missile-guiding Pigeons, challenging conventional thinking about intelligence. The Pigeons may not have won the war, but they certainly won a unique place in history, embodying a moment when science, warfare, and the humble pigeon converged in one of the most imaginative, if ultimately unfulfilled, research projects of the 20th century.